colleges and universities grapple with challenges and opportunities afforded by the First Amendment, related to controversial speakers, campus preachers, and even political issues, as Emory University recently experienced, where pro-Trump messages were written in chalk on sidewalks, causing an uproar.
A newly released Gallup survey for the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation finds that college students are supportive of free expression on campus. 78% of students surveyed says colleges should expose students to all types of speech and viewpoints. However, students also believe that colleges should be allowed to establish policies restricting language and behavior that are intentionally offensive to certain groups.
Our conversation this evening is designed for our community to hear the perspectives of faculty, staff, and students regarding expression at the University of Arizona. In order to maximize our time here together, Manny's going to share some rules of engagement.
All right, the fun stuff. We will begin the discussion by hearing expertise, thoughts, and perspectives from our panel members, and then open the floor for discussion. Please note the ground rules for the forum. Number 1, we wish to hear from as many people as possible, so please limit statements, questions to 1 minute. Listen for understanding. Inquire before you advocate. Respect each other's thinking and value their contributions. Number 4, speak your truth. Number 5, have fun.
And now it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists to you. We have Tony Massaro, who is a revered First Amendment expert and professor here at the James Rogers College of Law. Devin Mowell? Say it for me? Mowell, sorry, is a UA alum, and he's currently an academic advisor with the College of Public Health. He interned with the Women's Resource Center while he was an undergraduate student here at the U of A. Kat Hermanson is an undergraduate student representing the Pride Alliance and LGBTQ affairs, and has participated in creative ways to counter controversial speech on campus. Brother Kelly Bauer is a faculty member with the Institute of Religion and a member of the University Religious Council. And Kendall Washington White is our Dean of Students here, and her office has the delicate job of balancing protecting our freedom of expression here on campus and supporting the students who are impacted by free speech. We're going to begin with Professor Massaro.
So, thanks for coming. I've done pretty much the same thing. The same debate has been going on 26 years ago, 25 years ago, 24 years ago. It needs to be retaught, or for some taught for the first time. It's an extremely important baseline for a public university like ours. And so I'm really grateful to have been invited. There's an overarching ethic you're familiar with. A university, any university, but particularly a public one, is presumptively an open forum. Free, robust, and open discourse. It's a place for ideas, and it's a place for testing of certitudes. Academic freedom matters, intellectual exchange matters, and it's a place where the students who come here can expect to be challenged at the very struts of their beliefs, believe in the foundations of science, the foundation of cultures, of traditions, of religions, of philosophies, of histories, of politics, and yes, our place in the universe. It's inquiry all the way down. At a university, the word truth is presumptively pluralized. There isn't one truth. There are truths. And of course, there are many of us within the community who have been raised to believe in a truth or fewer truths. But the university has this incredibly difficult and enduringly significant job of being a place in which we're open for all of these challenges. Hannah Gray, who was the provost at Northwestern when I was there, said, "We're not here to make each other comfortable. We're here to make each other think." So that's the baseline. And the United States Constitution has an awful lot to say about this as it applies to universities like ours. I'm not going to be able to tonight make you conversant in all of the nuances of free speech. It's a very complicated area, let alone the nuances of equality. These are two giant classes, but it's important for anyone who's walking around on this campus to have some appreciation of these constraints and promises. The liberty is the one hand clapping and equality is the second hand clapping. So here's the top 10 rules you want to keep in mind when you're thinking about what our Constitution insists upon with respect to free speech. First of all, only the government can deny you constitutional free speech. It is only the government who is constrained by it, and only the government that can deny it to you. A private person is not constrained by freedom of speech under the Constitution. I like to give the example to my students where I worked for one cussed day at Burger King. If I had been fired, I wasn't, I just left, but if I had been fired because I spoke up disrespectfully or got into some sort of a political brouhaha with my boss and thought that I had a First Amendment right, I would have made a category error. But working here at the University of Arizona, I'm in luck because I have free speech rights here that I wouldn't have in the private sector. And our students have constitutional speech rights here that they wouldn't have at a private school. Private schools often hold themselves into the same requirements through other things other than the Constitution, as conditions of receiving money, etc. But there's a giant baseline that an average American doesn't appreciate. The Constitution only constrains the government, or this part of it does. Second, the worst thing the university can do as a government actor is engage in content-specific regulation of speech. That is to say, you can't speak because of what you are talking about. When it does that, it has to prove that it has a compelling reason for doing this and that the method by which they've done it is the least restrictive. A very, very demanding standard. It's only been deemed to be satisfied 3 times, 4 now, by the United States Supreme Court. That is tough stuff for the university to consider when it's implementing its student conduct rules and its teacher conduct rules and everything else. Third rule is related to the first. Even worse than content specific, like we shall not talk about fill in the blank topic, politics. It's worse if you say we shall not talk about politics from a Republican or a Democratic perspective. That's viewpoint discrimination, and you can hear the difference. It's even worse because government's weighing in and clamping down on one side of the debate, not just the topic, but one side of the debate within the topic. Fourth, freedom of speech protects expression. That can include expressive conduct, like flag burning, but generally speaking, it does not include conduct, like trespass. And so we need to navigate between that which is covered by it, these expressive acts intended to be and understood to be expression of an idea or viewpoint, and those things that are just pure conduct. Government can regulate our conduct, even when there's a speech or expressive component of it, if it has neutral reasons for doing it. Now, that doesn't mean that every speech act is protected. I said content-specific regulation can't happen, but historically, the development of the First Amendment in our country has led to some categorical exceptions, things that are thought to be no part of the legitimate marketplace of ideas. Fighting words, true threats are good examples. Obscenity is another example. And the nuances of each of these exceptions, again, I don't expect you tonight to come to appreciate them, but there are nuances and they're strictly construed, particularly by the current court. But there are things that are off limits. Even this stuff, though, take fighting words, which can be prescribed, a face-to-face thing that would want you to punch someone in the nose. If the university regulates fighting words selectively, not all fighting words, but were to, for example, just tease out racist fighting words, it would have violated constitutional law. It would need to go broader in this case in order to legitimately regulate even otherwise regulable speech, such as a fighting word. Sixth rule, and it's a big one, context matters. The big general, most speech protective rules operate in the public forum. Think of the quintessential street corner. That's the place where your freedoms are at their zenith, their maximum. But the university is like a little town, and there are all these different parts and places in it. And so the university, on the one hand, is presumptively an open public forum, and ours is. But within it, the university is entitled to and does regulate a kind of time, manner, place context. I teach free speech. It is not a classroom in which you can say anything. You can't disrupt it. There's a job to do in that zone. And there are places where we have students who are sleeping, or other things that are happening where it's important for the university to assure that the job that we're conducting in that part of the university can be done safely and effectively. As long as the rules that we set up with respect to protecting those places are, again, content neutral, time, manner, place regulations, we should be okay. But in some of those contexts, we can even become content specific. When I run a class on free speech, the topic is free speech. And extraneous comments about things that have nothing to do with the subject matter, I can control, even though I'm a government actor and I have to respect my students' free speech. So context matters a lot. Rule number 7. The worst thing, the framers, and by this I mean the framers of the First Amendment, which was adopted in 1791. The First Amendment free speech that constrains the university wasn't the people in the tri-cornered hats. That didn't happen until after the Civil War. That's a whole other topic. But the bottom line is that even from the very, very beginning in the 18th century, they thought the worst thing was a prior restraint. What does that mean? There's a difference between reading the rules in your student handbook and knowing if you violate them, you could be punished. It's worse if the university were to say, before you speak, you have to run it by someone in the university and get, sort of the rubber stamp or authorization or a permit. That's a prior restraint. A post hoc restraint, a rule, if it's fair and you can be punished, is not a prior restraint. But the worst thing under the First Amendment universe is a prior restraint. Rule number 8. One person's vulgarity is another person's lyric. You've all heard it. What you might not know is the predecessor adage was one person's certitude is another person's blasphemy, right? But one person's entertainment is another. The bottom line is that the First Amendment, if you're in the zone of legitimate discourse, you get to decide how you express yourself. If it's not within an exception, you can be vulgar, you can be taunting, you can be offensive. You can engage another person to the point of them being quite disturbed by what you have to say, and that is not presumptively or a legitimate reason to clamp down on the speaker under abiding now for many, many decades American constitutional law. In the very beginning, we had colonists who were very touchy people, suing each other right and left and passing legislation that certain kinds of words in public were anathema, etc. And those days are so over. And that happened as a function of the student movement in the 60s and the aftermath of World War I and World War II, and seeing people who were regarded as having said things that were offensive, spending time, sometimes a decade or more, in jail. And liberating substantially our idea of what is protected and moving very, very far from those original rigid concepts. We also have number 9, strange still treatment of sexually explicit expression. There are rules with respect to sexually explicit expression that frankly make no sense when looked at in the wider universe of vulgarity, etc. Example. If you have a violent video, the court recently said that minors did have the right to obtain an interactive violent video. Had the violent video had nudity in it, the minors would not have been able to obtain it. But don't be fooled. Just because you can't see certain words or hear certain words at certain times on television doesn't mean that sexually explicit speech is unprotected. Obscenity is a very small subcategory of this. Pornography is protected speech in this country. And more on that later. Pornography is protected speech, and it's protected quite robustly. So the final rule is that the government chilling of speech is regarded as worse than government chilling of other conduct. It's given all kinds of peculiar and fairly dramatic protection. And I guess the reason might be thought of this way, is that freedom of speech is thought to be logically prior. to democracy. That you have to have freedom of speech in order to have a liberal democratic order like ours, and for the pluralism that we want to be robust to survive. So our campus is not a freedom from speech zone, it's the quintessential marketplace of ideas zone. Civility, yep, it matters, but it can't be enforced at the expense of speech freedom. And codes that do this falter. There can be counter speech. You can avert your eyes. Counter speech can be quite creative, but what you can't engage in is a heckler's veto. It can't become to the point that the counter speech drowns out the speaker. The university is obliged to first protect the speaker. Only if it's impossible can they then arrest or ask the speaker to stand down. So that is a big lift for everybody who works, lives, plays, thinks here. It means that we are expected to tolerate a real large amount of noise and offense, and guess what, even pay for it for our students, pay for it through tuition and fees. And here's the pickle for the university. No matter which way it moves, politically, it gets it on the chin. If it doesn't speak up, it gets it on the chin. If it speaks up, it's accused of political correctness and silencing. And if it doesn't do anything at all and the speech becomes conduct, if it goes over the line, it becomes harassment, the university has an affirmative obligation to do something about that too. And then I'll turn it over to my panelists and answer any questions you have. The important thing for you to realize is that the civility on this campus is a personal responsibility. It really can't be and shouldn't be ordered by the university. And to the extent that we encourage it and ask of it, and perhaps in some contexts we may be entitled to demand it, but mostly it's regarded as antithetical to this notion that we're here sometimes to be disturbed, to be very disturbed. And I'll say one more thing before turning it over. I teach equality. I do not blink in the face of the reality that this cheery little story about freedom of speech in the United States of America is something that everybody pays the same price for. I don't believe it. I think there are disparate impacts. I think that there are cultural patterns and ways of talking about things and people and ideas that systematically cause some of us to bear a bigger burden with respect to freedom of speech than others of us. But it takes a theory to beat a theory. And the conclusion of our Constitution is that we'd be worse off if we put the thumb on the scale of one side of the debate. And so we have to work within that difficult space, even if for some of us it's a daily payment forward and right now so that other people can glorify freedom of speech, where they're not as likely to be selectively damaged by it in the same way that the rest of us are. That's just a cultural reality and cost of freedom of speech that we all bear.
So I hope I'm going to be nearly half as articulate, but if I'm not, feel free to heckle me. So hi everybody. Again, my name is Devin Mulmowell, and I'm currently an undergraduate academic advisor in the College of Public Health here at the University of Arizona, as well as a double alumnus of the University of Arizona, having gotten my bachelor's degree and then my master's in higher education here. Currently, I'll be kind of serving as a representative of the Women's Resource Center, having formerly been a founding member of the Men's Project internship through the Women's Resource Center, as well as working really closely with FORCE, as well as OASIS and the Women's Interest Collaborative. So, just to kind of piggyback on all of that, I think the focus of what I'll be presenting today is more reactive and proactive solutions to the freedom of speech issues you might be finding on campus, knowing that the university does have a very narrow window in which it can act regarding specific freedom of speech issues. So how can the community and or the communities that you're a part of then react in order to make the favorable outcome you're looking for? So to begin with, I'll kind of give a little bit of backstory on my involvement in the Women's Resource Center. So back in 2013, the founding semester of the Men's Project. And for those of you who don't know, the Men's Project is an internship or class opportunity for students who would like to grapple with the issue of masculinity, especially on college campuses, dealing with fraternities, conduct issues, safety issues, but really kind of that toxic masculinity issue and helping students realize their role in masculinity and figuring out their gender expression, their gender interpretations. So during that semester, I'm sure many of you have heard of Brother Dean Saxton. No? Okay. Well, Brother Dean Saxton made his debut at the University of Arizona after we've had many similar ministers of their own faiths coming to the University of Arizona. If you've heard of Brother Jed, for example, Brother Dean kind of followed in those footsteps where he would take to the mall, take to Heritage Hill, etc., and express his beliefs about what people did and didn't deserve, the way that people should and shouldn't interact with the community, society, etc. One such instance that happened in the middle of that 2013 semester was a nationally publicized event where he held up a sign that expressed that women, or specifically it just said you, deserve rape. So if you recall that specific incident, I'm sorry if this bringing it back up as a triggering event, but the You Deserve Rape campaign that he was putting together received national publicity, and it brought a lot of very negative attention to the University of Arizona. So not only were university administrators dealing with the national attention and the publicity around that, but there was also quite the interest from students in having some kind of formalized response put together. The first line that most students were expecting was to have Brother Dean Saxton, who was at the time a student here at the university, expelled from the university. That is something that I'm sure will be talked about later as to what can and can't be done in terms of freedom of speech. But in that particular instance, that was not a solution that was able to be pursued. So what I thought when I was in the Women's Resource Center as an intern is that there have to be alternative ways for the community to be able to combat these issues while still maintaining the integrity of freedom of speech. So having worked with Krista Millay before and then continuing to work with her as the director of the Women's Resource Center, we came up with the idea for a You Deserve Day. So for those of you who happen to be here and for those of you who weren't, the You Deserve Day was predominantly put together by the Women's Interest Collaborative, as well as the Greater Women's Interest Collaborative here at the University of Arizona, which is a partnership of university groups, organizations, as well as community groups and organizations. And the Women's Interest Collaborative put on the event to allow students to say what they actually thought they deserved. So if you recall, the sign said you deserve rape. A lot of students didn't agree with that particular message. So in an effort to give students the autonomy to say what they did deserve, a tent was erected on the mall that lasted for 8 hours throughout the entire day, at which students would be able to approach. They'd be able to make a sign on which was previously printed, "You deserve," and then they could write what they thought they deserved as students of the university, as participants in the community, as humans. And these positive messages would be kind of a more passive symbol, able to be used to drown out maybe more negative messages that were being portrayed by Brother Dean Saxton. So in that event, I would say that there were more than 250 students who eventually came by throughout that day to make their You Deserve signs, and then a good majority of them stuck around, holding their signs, actively representing the things that they thought that they deserved. These things include love, happiness, the ability to get an education without feeling intimidated or threatened or unsafe. Many students from all walks of life, including graduate students, professional students, even students, or even staff and faculty here at the university, approached the tent and made their You Deserve signs. And then those signs were then later put up around the university, more specifically in the Center for Student Involvement and Leadership around the Women's Resource Center, to be able to show students that this isn't a one-time conversation, that no matter what, you deserve these things, in contrast to the message that Brother Dean Saxton was putting together. Additionally, there have been events on the mall where pro-life messages have been displayed almost exclusively and in quite prominent manner, with like 30-foot tall billboards and displays that may or may not be appealing to the eye. those similar situations or those similar events also kind of put together a response from the Women's Resource Center in what they called choice days. So to kind of counter protest these strictly pro-life messages that were bordering on vulgar, the Women's Resource Center put together tabling events and opportunities for students, particularly women, to learn about their options, to learn about what kind of choices they did have in the situations that they found themselves with an unexpected or expected pregnancy. So these kinds of counter protests were really kind of an influential point because it shows students that there was an opportunity to be able to engage with these messages, but in a way that wasn't alone. And I feel like that's the thing that a lot of our students are intimidated by and or they feel isolated by. If you pass by this message on the mall, you are an isolated student passing by this message. But if you recognize that there is a community of people, whether through the Women's Resource Center, Pride Alliance and LGBTQ Affairs, the University Religion Council, through any of these particular groups, you recognize that you have that community and you use that community to rally against a message or for a more positive message that you believe in, then I think that provides you with so much ammo that most students don't even realize they have at the university campus. In regards to a lot of the reaction to messages such as these, a lot of students have said, expelled Brother Dean or similar people from the campus, so they aren't able to put these words out there. But I think something that's summed up pretty well is that verbal purity is not social change. So you can put the kibosh on people saying specific things or people using specific words. You can encourage or discourage people from a particular terminology or vocabulary. But I think it's important to recognize that doesn't necessarily equate to a lasting social change or a community at which the University of Arizona is now a safe, welcoming community. It just moves those activities underground to a place that we may not be able to actively move against them. So while it's unfortunate that these students, ministers, etc., think that these kinds of freedom of speech or this expression is the most appropriate use of their time, it gives us the opportunity to be able to combat it in a more active way. So the silver lining on that kind of gray cloud.
Is this one on? Oh, it is. Lovely. Hi, I'm Kat. I'm the head of marketing for Pride Alliance and LGBTQ Affairs on campus based at the LGBTQ Resource Center on the 4th floor. We have rainbows, check us out. So I'm the head of marketing, which means I'm really interested in representation of communities and especially working within and for marginalized communities. I'm really interested in like how we're portraying ourselves, how we're being portrayed by other people, and like the splits within the communities and how those representations differ between, let's say, like white queer people and like trans people of color, for instance, within their own communities. I also study religion, and was raised religious, and so things like this are not a ground that I'm familiar with, and I'm very interested in how there's like secular versus religious pushback, especially on a university institution. So going off what was said earlier about equality and how we have rights, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have equality. Just to put a name to some of those things, the people who bear the brunt of a lot of inequality are marginalized communities, and that includes women, that includes people of color, that includes trans people and queer people, working class people, disabled people, amongst other minority groups who often don't stand on even ground despite various like constitutional protections that exist, are often not benefiting from the different forms of freedom of speech that we have, even though that's not supposed to be how it is. That's often how it manifests itself in reality. So in light of this, many marginalized communities, especially queer communities from the 1990s to now, have taken different ways of approaching these situations where hate speech is being directed to us and hate speech is being directed at other marginalized communities, because there's not necessarily the same trust of institutions, of the Constitution, of the police, of other things that are supposed to be looking for us, because it's a reality that oftentimes they don't. So a lot of the efforts that come out of marginalized communities is to create the things that were called earlier counter speech, to find alternative ways of addressing these problems that aren't necessarily appeals to authority, but use our own power and the power that we create within our communities and within solidarity alliances between various oppressed peoples to stand up for ourselves and to mitigate the problem that way. So something that I participated in several times during my career at U of A is Project Angel. So I participated in Project Angel 2013 and 2014, and then this past year I was one of the main organizers of Project Angel. Project Angel, for those of you who don't know, is a counter-speech movement that came out of the Matthew Shepard's trial and funeral. Some backstory on that: Matthew Shepard was a young man in Ohio? Wyoming? One of those. Over there. Was a young man in Wyoming who was essentially taken out and beaten, and it was considered a hate crime because he was gay. There may or may not have been drugs involved. I don't personally care. But eventually what came out of that is the Westboro Baptist Church protested his funeral. And the Westboro Baptist Church, I'm sure many of you have heard of, is a very interesting denomination of fundamentalist Christians who go places and protest things often. It's kind of their thing that they do. And they have a habit of protesting funerals of people who they believe are the reason that humanity is being punished for whatever thing that they think they're being punished for on that day. But their presence at funerals, as you can imagine, often isn't welcome. They protest the funerals of queer people often, as well as like certain children, various things. But they're specifically in Matthew Shepard's case, their friends got together, or Matthew Shepard's friends got together and put on these large angel wings and stood between the protesters of the funeral and the funeral attendants, so that Matthew Shepard's parents didn't have to see these hate speech people protesting their son's funeral, and creating a kind of barrier so that people, even though they could still hear them to some degree, they didn't have to like witness that kind of aggression at like a final resting ceremony. So that's the history of it. We also have done this here, as I said, with mixed effectiveness depending on the year, depending on who's involved and who's organizing. It's very meaningful for the queer community because of the history behind it, but often, for example, like last year, we had the Angel Wings out like surrounding Brother Jed when he was here around Valentine's Day, which is around the same time it comes every year. And on Yik Yak, which is an app, someone was like, "Why is the KKK on the mall?" And we were like, "Whoa, we are not the KKK." So it's difficult sometimes to like, as with all organizing, it's difficult to get the effect you want out of various counter strategies. So the upside is that people didn't have to witness the really awful signs and see the awful things that Brother Jed was saying. On the downside, some people thought the KKK was on campus. That can be seen as effective or ineffective depending on how you want to look at it. But it does prevent, regardless of what some people thought we were doing, it did prevent a lot of people from being pointed out and like specifically harassed by Brother Jed and Cindy and Brother Dean, who were all there on that day. Yeah, and in addition to it being a fairly effective strategy in that way, these kinds of campaigns are often ways that people build solidarity. When these hate preachers are going around, they're not usually often they are targeting one specific group, but more often they weave in and out of Islamophobia, queerphobia, and misogyny. Just a really smorgasbord of hate. And so it's a really great way often to like build solidarity and defeat isolation, which a lot of the times is like the most horrible things that happen is when you feel alone and you feel attacked. It's a really good way to like mitigate that feeling amongst students. Other strategies have also been proven effective. One year we followed people who had been like specifically targeted by the hate preachers and offered like one-on-one support. Other times we just passed out cards with like loving and affirming messages to people on the mall. while they were out there. My partner and some other off-campus queer folks organized an impromptu noise set this past semester, which Kendall Washington White was not thrilled about, but it was very effective in making people leave the area, so that was good. So yeah, really, within counter speech, the important thing is like setting a goal. Is your goal to like make people disperse? Is your goal to like make people know that they have people that will stand in solidarity with them and are there for them? Is your goal to have your voice be louder than all the other voices on the mall? Really depends on how you approach the situation. And in really complicated and nuanced situations like these, there's not always a right answer, but some things are definitely more effective than others, and that also depends on the community that is being targeted and the community that is responding. So, yeah.
So I'm Kelly Bauer. I'm the president of the university's Religious Council and the director of the Institute of Religion for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints here on campus. Let me say, first of all, from the standpoint of the university's Religious Council, we unanimously condemn the preaching that the likes of Brother Jed and Brother Dean spew forth on campus. They are not a part of the university's Religious Council in any way, shape, or form. We do not support them. We do not cooperate with them. I appreciated what Professor Massaro said. These are itinerant preachers who come here and use their rights to freedom of speech. But if I may, I submit they're just trying to get people, they're just trying to get crowds. You understand what I mean? They're just shock jocks. And that really is their purpose. They're not trying to preach to you or win converts. They just get some sort of rise out of coming onto the campus and saying or displaying really shocking things and hoping to gather crowds. So I'd like to say that just from the forefront, that we don't support them in any way, shape, or form. Thomas Jefferson once said that religion and liberty must rise and fall together in America. And I really do believe that that's true. I appreciated once again what Professor Massaro said, that we do have to allow people their freedoms of speech, and we have to allow people freedom of religion as well. You know, we have one side of the spectrum where we're thinking, gee whiz, we want to quiet these individuals. They're saying some insulting and offensive things. And I completely agree, by the way, that they're saying insulting and offensive things. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have, unfortunately, some occupants of some of the high-rise apartments throwing things at the Islamic Center and actually targeting individuals, Muslim men and women, some of whom attend school here. And so we need to provide protection for everybody. And like was said earlier, unfortunately, because we live in this kind of microcosm, this little city in and of itself, we do have to put up with some offensive and insulting things. I go to the recreation center on a regular basis, and there's pretty much not a day that goes by when I'm there that I don't hear someone say something that I find offensive and insulting. But if I were to turn around every single time and cleanse the temple, as it were, and turn over some tables, and I would not be welcome there for very much longer. And so we've got to find, I believe, and the University Religious Council believes, we've got to find a way where we can engage in civil and respectful conversations. And there are some individuals who come here itinerantly on campus who have zero interest in engaging in civil and respectful conversations with you. And I know this is easier said than done, and maybe in some ways very simplistic, but the best approach is just to ignore it. You might remember back when you were in elementary school and you had students who were bothering other students, and the teacher would say, "You're only encouraging him." Stop saying something. And the same thing is true here. Brother Dean gets a lift off of someone yelling at him or gathering small crowds, and everybody's got their phones out and they're recording him. That's what he enjoys. And so the best thing to do is to just simply walk on by. I would add one more thing. As a believing Christian myself, I would just encourage you, please try hard not to pigeonhole all of people of faith and all Christians into the same category to which these individuals. I appreciate that Kat mentioned the Westboro Baptist Church. They're just weirdos. That's the bottom line. There's no other way around that. They're weirdos. They have every right to be weirdos, and so we allow them to be religious weirdos. But not everybody who is a person of faith is a weirdo. And some of us, can have logical and civil and respectful conversations, and we can be more than willing to accept that other people have different views. And so I just want you to know that the religious community on campus very much feels that way, and we don't believe at all in offending or insulting. We allow everyone the same rights regarding the rights that we feel we have as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Last but not least. All right. So, my remarks are going to be a little bit disparate here, but I wanted to talk about why do these issues and the people who spew the filth and vulgar language, the abortion displays that Devin discussed, why are they attracted to campuses like ours? And there's a variety of reasons for that. Number one, how many of you have to show an ID in order to get onto our campus? No one. We're an open campus, right? We're a public campus, and we invite all kinds of people to come to our university campus, whether you're a student, faculty, or staff. We have museums, theaters like Gallagher Theater, and we are open to the Tucson community and beyond. And that's the beauty of a public institution, is that it doesn't just belong to us who are real members of this community, but it's open to anyone in the Tucson community and beyond. We're also a campus that has a population of intellects at all levels. And I think when Brother Bauer says the easiest thing to do is to ignore it and walk away, but when you have people on a campus like ours who are curious, right, they want to engage in dialogue, it can be difficult because, you might want to change that person's mind, change Brother Dean's opinion about things. And, we have this spirit of inquiry on our campus, which I love. I think many of us who decided to pursue higher education as a career, we chose it because of the intellectual community, the ability to have conversations and debates and agree to disagree and come together and try to make the world a better place. So we are an ideal location. We also have a large population of young folks in the traditional age of 18 to 22 that are exploring their values, and whether that's changing some of them or confirming what they were taught growing up. And I think that these displays, these issues that we see on our campus, the folks who come recognize that about our population. And while some, I do think, are just, as Kelly said, they don't really have a goal, others do, of trying to convert, of trying to change your opinions. And so we are a ripe organization and area for these kinds of situations to happen. And so it's important that we recognize that and remember that we are an open community, and rightfully so. It's the right thing to do, and it's what makes campuses like ours wonderful. As far as the Dean of Students Office is concerned, as Kelly begged for you to not categorize and stereotype the religious community, I would ask the same of you for the Dean of Students Office. We have really tried over the years to change the perception of the principal's office, because that's not what we are. We are educators, we are student development professionals, and our goal is to try to facilitate the kind of campus environment where all of us can learn, live, play, and just thrive in this environment. And sometimes being the primary office that's responsible for that, it causes us heartburn, not because we don't want to do the job, but we understand all of the issues that Kat and Devin talked about the impact that it has on members of our community. I'm really fortunate to have a great team of folks who work in the Dean of Students office, and I want to acknowledge Kathy Adams-Reister, who's sitting right here in the front, and today's her birthday. Happy birthday, Kathy. Kathy really is the person in our office who monitors and manages the First Amendment issues on our campus, whether it comes to who's able to be on the mall. When we have disruption on the mall, Kathy is the person who is called regularly, and she has to run out there and try to figure out what's going on. But our goal is to help facilitate how the impact, or help facilitate the response to the impact on the students in particular. I know that sometimes it feels like to the students who are impacted that we are protecting the offender, and yes, we are, because there have been situations where it looked pretty dangerous, where that some people were, and actually some of the mall preachers in particular have been attacked, physically hit, water thrown at them, these different kinds of situations, and we have a duty to protect those people as well. But again, we do know the impact that it has on our student populations. One of the things that I think that we have done our best with, and again, a lot of the credit goes to Kathy, is that we've gotten much better about when we know that these controversial kinds of topics or situations are coming to campus, that we alert our peers, our colleagues on campus who we think may be impacted. And so the Women's Resource Center and LGBTQ Affairs, we will give them a heads up, but oftentimes they know before we do. So we've gotten this thing down so that we can offer the opportunity for counter speech. One of the things that I think is really funny that Kathy does is, when we know about demonstrations ahead of time, we will meet with those students or organizations to find out what are you really about, what is it that you're trying to accomplish. And Kathy will tell people, if you're trying to be arrested, we can help you be arrested. Okay? Because sometimes that's what the goal is to be arrested. And so we will tell you what the lines are, and if you cross those lines, then you will be arrested. We have a wonderful relationship with UAPD. I'm sure that you all are aware that at other colleges and universities, the police pretty much come in at demonstrations and may not have as high a level of tolerance for demonstrations as we do here, because we respect the First Amendment, we respect our students, and we want to hear their voices. So it's really important to know that we really do try to ensure the safety of all members of the community, but also to recognize the impact that it has on our communities. Kat mentioned earlier that there are certain populations on our campus who are impacted more than others from some of the negative and hateful speech. And unfortunately, those very same populations usually have to scream and shout in order to get some attention, whereas other people don't. And that's an issue that I don't know that we can solve necessarily, but it's a reality. And so it's important that we recognize that there's disparate impact on different communities when these situations happen. The primary issue that I tend to think about often on our campus and in our society in general, we have developed a zero tolerance policy for difference, right? Or people who have a different perspective or opinion than we do. When I was growing up as a child, and I'm older than many of you in the room, there were only three major news networks: ABC, CBS. Can you guys imagine that, right? Just three major networks and ABC. Did I say ABC? ABC, NBC, and CBS. And the reporting at that time was balanced and objective. And now we have infotainment, right? And so we can, if I don't want to hear MSNBC or Fox News, I can just change the channel and not have to hear any other perspective except for people who agree with me. Years ago, you didn't have that. You received unbiased and objective information, but now you can completely tune out any perspective that's different from yours. And I think that that has had a seriously negative impact on our communities, on our society, because we don't have the opportunity to hear other perspectives unless you are seeking it out, unless your family members force you to do so, right? I make my kids listen to NPR in the car. They hate it. So it's important that it's okay to be uncomfortable. And I think that sometimes when we receive telephone calls from parents and students to the Dean of Students office, the language is, I'm offended, or that person made me feel uncomfortable. Well, discomfort is okay. That's how we learn, that's how we stretch, that's how we grow and expand our horizons. But there's a difference between discomfort and being attacked, threatened, things of that nature. And so I don't condone that. But I am okay with people being uncomfortable because that's, again, how we learn and grow. Finally, we all have a responsibility to facilitate a campus community that is positive, that it's one where we feel comfortable and can stay and learn and live and all of those things. And as Devin and Kat have already indicated, there are ways that our voices can be heard. Kat mentioned the, what did you call it, a drown out, sound out? Sound out. So that was an interesting encounter. I loved it. So I just want to go on record to say that I loved it. I walked out of the Nugent building and I hear this awful sound and what the heck is going on? And as I get closer to the administration building, the sound is louder and louder and louder. And I knew, oh my gosh, the people who are in classes in the Modern Languages building, the psych building, the education building can probably hear this. And who do I see? They had plugged in some really nice speakers. I want those speakers. So really, some speakers, and you guys had the soundboard and everything, and it was the most obnoxious electric guitar music I've ever heard in my life, and it was so loud. And, Kathy was nowhere to be found. Kathy, thank you. And I see what's going on, and this is indicative of how we always approach these situations. I walked up to the students who were responsible for this noise and said, I understand what you're doing. You're countering Dean, I think it was Dean, right? You're countering what Dean, oh, it was Jed, okay. What you're doing, I understand it, I get it, and I like it. But, but I think your intention is good, but the impact on the folks who are in the other buildings, I said I don't think that your intention is to disrupt the classes. And so if you could just please turn the volume down. And they went like this. And I said, more, more, more. And then they said, well, you don't have a noise meter or the sound. And I said, I know, but I know that it's too loud. So we finally, the crew finally came and we were able to get the sound to the level that we needed to. But I could have, if we were a different kind of institution, a different type of Dean of Students office, just said, shut it down, shut it down. And in fact, I think I said several times, I'm not trying to shut you guys down. I want to support you here because I understand what it is that you're doing. So that's an example of the kind of work that we do with our students because we get it. We get both sides of the situation. And it's important for everyone to know that just because we're protecting people's right to freedom of expression doesn't mean that we agree with it as members of the Dean of Students office. I think that's really critical because sometimes we will judge the staff members as supporting and having the same beliefs. And I don't know who does and who doesn't, but I can tell you that I don't agree with it, but I also have a responsibility to the institution and with the Constitution, right? So that's really important, and I would just like to encourage everyone that if you can walk away or ignore, do that. But I would prefer to see you use your voices.